Welcome to our solar electric trailer journey. We're so glad you've joined us today. When we bought our Aliner Scout, the owners did not have keys to the lock, so we've been wanting to replace that. And in this episode, Devin will go through and show you quickly how he actually did replace that lock. Note that we'll share the audio via our podcast, but Devin's instructions will be easiest to follow on YouTube. So visit our solartrailer.com to see the embedded videos.
So I started by taking the lock out of the box. This is a MKing or MKing lock. It's a replacement lock for RVs and all sorts of trailers, but oftentimes people think of them as being primarily RV locks. So to open the door on the trailer, I have to raise the roof, but not all the way. So I propped it open. That allows me to do the work in the garage without taking the trailer out into the driveway where our neighbors would watch and perhaps object to seeing me do maintenance on my vehicle in the driveway. So I start by removing the screws from the old lock, for which we don't have the keys. And I was a little bit baffled by the friction on the deadbolt switch there, but it's just plastic on metal that just sticks on. So then the trick, after we remove these screws from the faceplate, is to get that old lock out. It's not too tricky, but it was a little bit more difficult than I anticipated. It certainly didn't fall out. Partly that was because it was sealed up using some caulk and that sort of thing to keep moisture out. And you'll notice I'm a little bit baffled as I do that by the white piece that was there. We'll come back to that later on. So here's the new lock, the replacement lock. I was a little bit surprised to discover that the screws were already placed, so I had to remove them, essentially take the lock apart in order to put it into the door. But that just took a moment, obviously, and I was able to get back to work of installing it. The really tricky part was getting the lock into the door. The outside facing piece has the lock in it, and I just really struggled. It finally took a combination of a little bit of elbow grease, or kind of forcing it a little bit, plus a little bit of twisting and turning to find just the right spot. After I placed it in, I got nervous about this gap. There's a big gap there, but I couldn't figure out how to close the gap, and figured I would come back to that later, and proceeded with the installation. But that, you can see, is quite a gap on the outside that would allow water and such into the doorway. So the kit comes with lots of screws, and I found the appropriate screws there for the installing the faceplate, which is the first effort at sort of locking the lock into place. It's kind of loose at this point, but once we get those two screws in, it's pretty much in place and easier to work with. My photography was a little off there, so I got some great elbow shots there and not as many great shots of me getting that work done. But we eventually got the screws in, and then we could put the inside facing part of the lock on. And I figured that plastic piece would hold up. It didn't, so I dropped it. So be careful if you're following my lead here. But I like to put my screws in using the screwdriver to get them started, just because it's easier to manage. And then I finished screwing them all in with my handy-dandy drill. And then I like to avoid over-tightening and do the final tightening with the screwdriver. You see the lock works here. I was able to get it done. But remember, there's still that ugly gap. So let me share the real story here, the mistakes I made and what I had to do to fix it. I really began to agonize over the big gap on that door, on the lock, on the outside side. It just didn't look right. And as I was recycling the old lock, my attention was drawn again to that white frame that was that white plastic frame that had been on it, and I began to think there must be a way to use that to close that gap, because that's clearly what it had been intended for. So I took it off, took the new lock off the door, and took some time to clean off all the gook, all the caulking and stuff that had been there from the old lock. I used this contractor solvent to clean that off. It works really, really well. My photography's not great, but it really cleaned that right up. It's a great solvent that it actually doesn't seem too toxic. So I took this old white frame after I cleaned it up and put it on the lock on the outside, and you can see here it perfectly fills that gap. I probably should go in and add a little bit of caulk around that, but it fills that gap so that it is secure and I think also relatively safe. So, put it back together, put the screws back in the faceplate there, and then put the outside on. Now, you'll notice here, as I'm reassembling the lock quickly, trying to make good time, I've got the latch propped open. And I didn't think anything of this as I was installing it. But you'll see quickly here that once I get it all installed, that it doesn't work. Right? It was not inconsequential, that in fact it was propped open while I installed it. I installed it wrong as a result of having it open. So locking and unlocking didn't help. And so I quickly find myself in a situation where, for a third time, I've got to uninstall and reinstall the lock. So it was kind of a crazy experience, a little bit humbling, but I'll show you what the problem was, so that if you're actually trying to do this, you avoid the same mistake. It took me a while to figure out what I had done wrong, but I'll show you here in a sec. There's a little gap. You see that where the two pieces need to connect with one another, and I had installed it with the latch open, so they didn't connect correctly, and so it wouldn't open the door. So that slider was not being moved by the latch. So I was able to, you can see the other component there. So it just needed to be done again. It isn't hard to get those pieces lined up, but I hadn't appreciated the need for that when I installed it the first two times. Got lucky the first time and carelessly did it wrong the second time. So third time's the charm. Got it installed the third time, including with of course, I left the lock in place with that white space filler, and so it ended up being all good. So installing this lock 3 times, including taking the time to set up a camera to do it all, it took me about an hour to do it 3 times. So this is not a big project for any other human. It would take a competent human, about 15 minutes to do this.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this helpful or know someone who would like this information, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Bye.